Okay. Well, welcome everybody. For those who are going to be watching this later, we're going to continue with our readings of stories from Dubliners. And today we'll be reading the second story, at least the second story, I should say, called An Encounter. And I believe, um, yeah, let me make sure. Okay, we have a current, well, the chat list is having to be updated frequently today. But anyway, I'll go ahead and get us started. So, An Encounter. It was Joe Dillon who introduced the Wild West to us. He had a little library made up of old numbers of the Union Jack, Pluck, and Halfpenny Marvel. Every evening after school, we met in his back garden and arranged Indian battles. He and his fat young brother, Leo, the idler, held the loft of the stable while we tried to carry it by storm. Or we fought a pitched battle on the grass. But however well we fought, we never won siege or battle, and all our bouts ended with Joe Dillon's war dance of victory. His parents went to the 8 o'clock mass every morning in Gardner Street, and the peaceful odor of Mrs. Dillon was prevalent in the hall of the house. But he played too fiercely for us, who were younger and more timid. He looked like some kind of Indian when he capered about the garden, an old tea cozy on his head, beating a tin can with his fist and yelling, "Yeah! Yaka, yaka, yaka!" Next, please.
Everyone was incredulous when it was reported that he had vocation for the priesthood. Nevertheless, it was true. A spirit of unruliness diffused itself among us, and under its influence, differences of culture and constitution were wavered. We banded ourselves together, some boldly, some in jest, and some almost in fear. And of the number of these latter, the reluctant Indians who were afraid to seem studious or lacking in robustness, I was one. The adventures related in the literature of the Wild West were remote from my nature, but at least they opened doors of escape. I liked better some American detective stories, which were traversed from time to time by unkempt, fierce, and beautiful girls. Though there was nothing wrong in these stories, and though their intention was sometimes literary, they were circulated secretly at school. One day, when Father Butler was hearing the 4 pages of Roman history, clumsily Leo Dillon was discovered with a copy of the Halfpenny Marvel. Next, please.
This page or this page? This page? Now, Dillon, up. Hardly had the day. Go, no. What day? Hardly had the day dawned. Have you studied it? What have you there in your pocket? Everyone's heart palpitated as Leo Dillon handed up the paper, and everyone assumed an innocent face. Father Butler turned over the pages, frowning. What is this rubbish, he said. Ye Apache chief, is this what you read instead of studying your Roman history? Let me not find any more of this wretched stuff in this college. The man who wrote it, I suppose, was some wretched scribbler that writes these things for a drink. I'm surprised at boys like you, educated, reading such stuff. I could understand it if you were national school boys. Now, Dillon, I advise you strongly, get at your work, or this rebuke during the sober hours of school paled much of the glory of the Wild West for me, and the confused, puffy face of Leo Dillon awakened one of my consciences. But when the restraining influence of the school was at a distance, I began to hunger again for wild sensation, for the escape which those chronicles of disorder alone seemed to offer me. The mimic warfare of the evening became at last as wearisome to me as the routine of school in the morning, because I wanted real adventures to happen to myself. But real adventures are reflected do not happen to people who remain at home. They must be sought abroad. Next, please.
The summer holidays were Pardon?
No, it's okay, John. There was some
Oh.
noise.
The summer holidays were near at hand when I made up my mind to break out of the weariness of school life, for one day at least. With Leo Dillon and a boy named Mahoney, I planned a day mitching. Each of us saved up sixpence. We were to meet at 10 in the morning on the canal bridge. Mahoney's big sister was to write an excuse for him, and Leo Dillon was to tell his brother to say he was sick. We arranged to go along the wharf road until we came to the ships, then to cross in the ferry boat and walk out to see the pigeon house. Leo Dillon was afraid we might meet Father Butler or someone out of the college, but Mahoney asked very sensibly, what would Father be doing out at the pigeon house? We were reassured, and I brought the first page of the plot to an end by collecting sixpence from the other two, at the same time showing them my own sixpence. When we were making the last arrangements on the eve, we were all vaguely excited. We shook hands laughing, and Mahoney said, "Till tomorrow, mates." Next, please.
That night I slept badly. In the morning I was first comer to the bridge, as I lived nearest. I hid my books in the long grass near the ash pit at the end of the garden, where nobody ever came, and hurried along the canal bank. It was a mild sunny morning in the first week of June. I sat up on the coping of the bridge, admiring my frail canvas shoes, which I had diligently pipe-clayed overnight, and watching the docile horses pulling a tramload of business people up the hill. All the branches of the tall trees, which lined them all, were gay with little light green leaves, and the sunlight slanted through them on the water. The granite stone of the bridge was beginning to warm, and I began to pat it with my hands in time to an air in my head. I was very happy. Next.
Trina, you have your microphone.
I'm sorry. When I had been sitting there for 5 or 10 minutes, I saw Mahoney's gray suit approaching. He came up the hill, smiling, and clambered up beside me on the bridge. While we were waiting, he brought out the catapult, which bulged from his inner pocket, and explained some improvements which he had made in it. I asked him why he had brought it, and he told me that he brought it to have some gas with the birds. Mahoney used slang freely and spoke of Father Butler as Bunsen burner. We waited on for a quarter of an hour or more, but still there was no sign of Leo Dillon. Mahoney at last jumped down and said, "Come along." I knew Fatty'd funk it. "And a sixpence?" I said. "That's forfeit," said Mahoney, "and so much the better for us, a bob and a tanner instead of a bob." We walked along the North Strand Road till we came to the vitriol works, and then turned to the right along the wharf road. Mahoney began to play the Indian as soon as we were out of public sight. He chased a crowd of ragged girls, brandishing his unloaded catapult, and when two ragged boys began out of chivalry to fling stones at us, he proposed that we should charge them. I objected that the boys were too small, and so we walked on, the ragged troop screaming after us, "Swaddlers, swaddlers," thinking that we were Protestants because Mahoney, who was dark-complexioned, wore the silver badge of a cricket club in his cap. When we came to the smoothing iron, we arranged a siege, but it was a failure because you must have at least 3. We revenged ourselves on Leo Dillon by saying what a funk he was and guessing how many he would get at 3 o'clock for Mr. Ryan. Next, please.
Joe? Microphone.
Sorry, I was looking at an out-of-date reading order. When we came then near the river. We spent a long time walking about the noisy streets, flanked by high stone walls, watching the working of the cranes and engines, and often been shouted at for our immobility by the drivers of groaning carts. It was noon when we reached the quays, and as all the labourers seemed to be eating their lunches, we bought 2 big currant buns and sat down to eat them on some metal piping beside the river. We pleased ourselves with the spectacle of Dublin's commerce, the barges signalling from far away by their curls of woolly smoke, the brown fishing fleet beyond Ringsend, the big white sailing vessel which was discharging on the opposite quay. Manley said it would be right skit to run away to sea on one of those big ships. And even I, looking at the high masts, saw or imagined the geography which had been scantily dosed to me at school, gradually taking substance under my eyes. School and home seemed to recede from us, and their influences upon us seemed to wane. Tom, is it? Sorry, whoever's next. Sorry.
We crossed the Liffey in the ferry boat, paying our toll, to be transported in the company of 2 laborers and a little Jew with a bag. We were serious to the point of solemnity, but once during the short voyage, our eyes met and we laughed. When we landed, we watched the discharging of the graceful 3-master which we had observed from the other quay. Some bystanders said that she was a Norwegian vessel. I went to the stern and tried to decipher the legend upon it, but failing to do so, I came back and examined the foreign sailors to see had any of them green eyes, for I had some confused notion. The sailors' eyes were blue and gray and even black. The only sailor whose eyes could have been called green was a tall man who amused the crowd on the quay by calling out cheerfully every time the planks fell, "All right, all right." When we were tired of this sight, we wandered slowly into Ringsend. The day had grown sultry, and in the windows of the grocer shops, musty biscuits lay bleaching. We bought some biscuits and chocolate, which we ate sedulously as we wandered through the squalid streets where the families of the fishermen live. We could find no dairy, and so we went into a huckster shop and bought a bottle of raspberry lemonade each. Refreshed by this, Mahoney chased a cat down a lane, but the cat escaped into a wide field. We both felt rather tired, and when we reached the field, we made at once for a sloping bank over the ridge of which we could see the Dodder. Next, please.
It was too late, and we were too tired to carry out our project of visiting the pigeon house. We had to be home before 4 o'clock, lest our adventure should be discovered. Manny looked regretfully at his catapult, and I had to suggest going home by train before he regained any cheerfulness. The sun went in behind some clouds and left us to our jaded thoughts and the crumbs of our provisions. There was nobody but ourselves in the field. When we had lain on the bank for some time without speaking, I saw a man approaching from the far end of the field. I watched him lazily as I choose one of those green stems on which girls tell fortunes. He came along by the bank slowly. He walked with one hand upon his hip, and in the other hand he held a stick with which he tapped the turf lightly. He was shabbily dressed in a suit of greenish black and wore what we used to call a jerry hat with a high crown. He seemed to be fairly old, for his mustache was ashen gray. When he passed at our feet, he glanced up at us quickly and then continued his way. We followed him with our eyes and saw that when he had gone on for perhaps 50 paces, he turned about and began to retrace his steps. He walked towards us very slowly, always tapping the ground with his stick, so slowly that I thought he was looking for something in the grass. Next.
Anna Mouse, are you reading? I guess not. He stopped when he came level with us and bade us good day. We answered him, and he sat down beside us on the slope slowly and with great care. He began to talk of the weather, saying it would be a very hot summer, and adding that the seasons had changed greatly since he was a boy, a long time ago. He said that the happiest time of one's life was undoubtedly one's schoolboy days, and that he would give anything to be young again. While he expressed these sentiments, which bored us a little, we kept silent. Then he began to talk of school and of books. He asked whether we had read the poetry of Thomas Moore or the works of Sir Walter Scott or Lord Lytton. I pretended that I had read every book he mentioned, so that in the end he said, "Ah,
Did you freeze?
hold on, there we go. Ah, I can see you're a bookworm like myself. Now," he added, pointing to Mahoney, who was regarding us with open eyes, "he was different. He's different. He goes in for games." Next reader.
He said he had also all Sir Walter Scott's works and all Lord Lytton's works at home, and never tired of reading them. Of course, he said there were some of Lord Lytton's works which boys couldn't read. Manny asked why couldn't boys read them, a question which agitated and pained me because I was afraid the man would think I was as stupid as Manny. The man, however, only smiled. I saw that he had great gaps in his mouth between his yellow teeth. And then he asked us which of us had the most sweethearts. Manny mentioned lightly that he had 3 totties. The man asked me how many I had. I answered that I had none. He did not believe me and said he was sure I must have one. I was silent. "Tell us," said Manny pertly to the man, "how many have you had yourself?" The man smiled as before and said that when he was our age, he had lots of sweethearts. Next, please.
Every boy, he said, has a little sweetheart. His attitude on this point struck me as strangely liberal in a man of his age. In my heart, I thought that what he said about boys and sweethearts was reasonable, but I disliked the words in his mouth, and I wondered why he shivered once or twice, as if he feared something or felt a sudden chill. As he proceeded, I noticed that his accent was good. He began to speak to us about girls, saying what nice soft hair they had, and how soft their hands were, and how all girls were not so good as they seemed to be if one only knew. There was nothing he liked, he said, so much as looking at a nice young girl, at her nice white hands and her beautiful soft hair. He gave me the impression that he was repeating something which he had learned by heart, or that, magnetized by some words of his own speech, his mind was slowly circling around and round in the same orbit. At times he spoke as if he were simply alluding to some fact that everybody knew, and at times he lowered his voice and spoke mysteriously, as if he were telling us something secret which he did not wish others to overhear. He repeated his phrases over and over again, varying them and surrounding them with his monotonous voice. I continued to gaze towards the foot of the slope, listening to him. Next, please.
After a long while, his monologue paused. He stood up slowly, saying that he had to leave us for a minute or so, a few minutes, and without changing the direction of my gaze, I saw him walking slowly away from us toward the near end of the field. We remained silent when he had gone. After a silence of a few minutes, I heard Mahoney exclaim, "I say, look what he's doing." As I neither answered nor raised my eyes, Mahoney exclaimed again, "I say, he's a queer old josser." "In case he asks us for our names," I said, "let you be Murphy and I'll be Smith." We said nothing further to each other. I was still considering whether I would go away or not when the man came back and sat down beside us again. Hardly had he sat down when Mahoney, catching sight of the cat, which had escaped him, sprang up and pursued her across the field. The man and I watched the chase. The cat escaped once more, and Mahoney began to throw stones at the wall she had escalated. Desisting from this, he began to wander about the far end of the field aimlessly. Next, please.
After an interval, the man spoke to me. He said that my friend was a very rough boy and asked that he get whipped often at school. I was going to reply indignantly that we were not national school boys to be whipped, as he called it, but I remained silent. He began to speak on the subject of chastising boys. His mind, as if magnetized again by his speech, seemed to circle slowly round and round its new centre. He said that when boys were that kind, they ought to be whipped, and well whipped. When a boy was rough and unruly, there was nothing that would do him any good but a good sound whipping. A slap on the hand or a box in the ear was no good. What he wanted was to get a nice warm whipping. I was surprised at this sentiment and involuntarily glanced at his face. As I did so, I met the gaze of a pair of bottle green eyes peering at me from under a twitching forehead. I turned my eyes away again. Next.
The man continued his monologue. He seemed to have forgotten his recent liberalism. He said that if he ever found a boy talking to girls or having a girl for a sweetheart, he would whip him and whip him, and that would teach him not to be talking to girls. And if a boy had a girl for a sweetheart and told lies about it, then he would give him such a whipping as no boy ever got in this world. He said that there was nothing in this world he would like so well as that. He described to me how he would whip such a boy as if he were unfolding some elaborate mystery. He would love that, he said, better than anything in this world, and his voice, as he led me monotonously through the mystery, grew almost affectionate and seemed to plead with me that I should understand him. I waited till his monologue paused again. Then I stood up abruptly. Lest I should betray my agitation, I delayed a few moments, pretending to fix my shoe properly, and then, saying that I was obliged to go, I bade him goodbye. I went up the slope calmly, but my heart was beating quickly for fear that he would seize me by the ankles. When I reached the top of the slope, I turned round and, without looking at him, called loudly across the field, "Murphy!" My voice had an accent of forced bravery in it, and I was ashamed of my paltry stratagem. I had to call the name again before Mahoney heard me and hallooed in answer. How my heart beat as he came running across the field to me. He ran as if to bring me aid, and I was penitent, for in my heart I had always despised him a little.
All right.
Isn't this a creepy story?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm thinking back to last week's story, and
Yeah.
we discussed the age of the narrator. And
Mhm.
it seems to me as though the narrator in this story is even younger than last, because he's playing cowboys and Indians with his buddies and so on.
Mhm.
And the other parallel between the two stories for me is that Joe and I think Bill as well, had listened to our audience going up to 10,000 feet at the suggestion that there was a pedophile around. And here we go again, you know.
Yeah.
Perhaps more justification this time.
Yes.
But I don't think sorry, just to finish, I don't think the narrator is fully able to express the fear that he has of this old guy, but he knows there's something wrong about it.
Mhm.
I read the comments that Tyndall made regarding this story. He seemed to consider it a quest. He had a very different interpretation all the way through than I would have thought to myself in reading it. And he went and he labeled the story as it went in 3 sections. And I don't want to say too much because I don't, unless you want to hear it.
Yes.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
What's that?
Go right
Yes.
ahead, Joan.
The pigeon house, which was the lighthouse, was, he says, it was a quest, therefore, can be taken as a search for the third member of the Trinity. Or since Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost are one, as that hunt for Father, which to become the theme of Ulysses.
Bullshit. Bullshit.
Yeah,
the problem is the pigeon house is not the lighthouse.
I wasn't.
It's a power station.
Yeah, yeah. I have to agree.
Yeah.
Was saying it was a quest story. He would have been
Yeah.
fine, I think, if he had stopped right there.
Yeah, because the boys are traveling. I mean, this is a big adventure, as Donna says. These are very young. I hesitate to put an age on them, but judging by the guy who was much older than them, who had a great wish for the priesthood, and so he'd be 16 or 17. So these guys probably 10, that sort of thing at the highest, and then they go all the way down to the river. They cross the river on the ferry. The ferry is an open boat. I used once to get that ferry to work, you know, and it's obviously motor, but it's an open boat, and it seats about an outside 10 people. And then they're on the south side. They're in strange land. They're in the Wild West almost, you know. So in that sense, Douglas has the quest. Yeah, he's right up to that point. But and Jonah's point is great about the fear, because he shows all the signs of fear without knowing them. You know, he not wanting to, you know, he ties his shoe just to false confidence. I was once confronted by a man with a gun, and at my car, and I did a very silly thing. It was ridiculous. I locked all my doors. And when the police psychiatrist was interviewing me, you know, looking for because there was a man murdered, and I said, I locked the door. And he says, that's how we know you're telling the truth, because that's what people, when they're frightened, do. They do silly things, but it shows that you're trying to protect yourself. And luckily, I wasn't the target this time round. But you know, and I just didn't take a note of them, but I saw the signs there of fear, and not able to describe it. You know, he probably was very liberal, and then he's lost the liberalness.
But I think the fear is a result of just ignorance or naivete, inexperience. I don't think there's any grounds for fear. I don't think this guy is a threat in any way to them. They have no experience of an old man. I mean, it's almost like the Buddha's 4 encounters. You know, he meets he's never seen an old man, and he doesn't know what it is. And it's the same with this guy. This guy is just a harmless old man. You know, to me, the way I read this story, he goes up. I mean, he's old enough. He's like I am. When you got to go, you got to go. So he goes off to the end of the field and takes a leak. You know, that's what Mahoney's saying. Look what that guy's doing.
Yeah.
I mean, these two kids have never seen gentlemen peeing outdoors. I mean, these are not national school. They're not national school boys. You know, they're fairly. They can afford books in their house and adventure stories, detective novels, things like that. So these are somewhat sheltered, pampered, cosseted, maybe a bit. So their first encounter with the real world, he doesn't understand. And I guess maybe because he's read detective stories, he's afraid of strangers. I don't know.
I think you've been very generous, John. Sorry, John. Go ahead, please.
Oh, I thank you. I saw the man really as somebody dangerous. I thought he was a child predator, and he gave a lot of clues as to that along the way too, and all that, the spanking in the of the boys, and how that would give him so much pleasure. And I thought he was very scary.
I thought it was very creepy, but I think
Yeah.
it's our modern sensibilities that see this. That 100 years ago, I don't know how an author would have had that in front of mind. So I sort of dismissed it rather quickly, but it was creepy. But the other thing I want to say is I think these boys got exactly what they were looking for. They had an adventure.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Well,
But can I go back to the creepy old man? I mean, his language about girls and his descriptions of them and the soft hair and the white hands. You know, I don't care whether it was 100 years ago or not, but if they were my kids, I'd be telling them to get home quickly.
yeah, well, I can't go back 100 years. I'm not quite that old, but I can go back 50 years. And I can tell you, on a few of my adventures, I encountered some people who I don't think were dangerous predators, but they were definitely predators. I had a few more signs to go on than just talk. So I do view this as not unreasonable for the main boy to sense some danger here. Now,
But why does Mahoney not sense any danger? Mahoney's a bit thicker. He hasn't read as many books. He doesn't, he hasn't read detective dime novels and doesn't know what.
Yeah,
So I mean, Mahoney, look at the guy. He's pissing over there. There's a cat. There's a cat. He's just absolutely unaffected by this man. It's only the narrator who
the
has.
fact that he gets up and wanders away far enough that when the boy who receives the most attention decides time to get out of here, he has to call several times to get Mahoney's attention. Now, of course, this story can be viewed in contrasting ways, but I'm just saying it is not unreasonable. Unlike the first story, which I don't see any weirdness or sexual innuendo at all, this story, and I'm an old man, I should know what I speak of somewhat. This is a weird old man. His conversation gives it away.
I disagree, but
Can I have just come up with a big discovery that settles the great debate?
Oh, good.
I knew I had read it somewhere, but in My Brother's Keeper, I didn't remember this, but I said something in My Brother's Keeper. And there's a paragraph. Can I read you? Because this is Stanislaus Joyce telling him how this story comes about.
Oh, good.
No.
Would anyone like to place a few bets?
well,
I know the answer.
Yeah.
What odds are you giving, Joe?
It depends which way you're going. In an encounter, my brother describes a day's mitching which he and I, that's Stanislaus and James, planned to carry out while we were living in North Richmond Street, and our encounter with an elderly pederast.
Ah.
For us, he was just a juggins. Neither of us, and that's in quotes, neither of us could have any notion at the time what kind of juggins he was, but something funny in his speech and behavior put us on our guard at once. Mm-hmm. We thought he might be an escaped madman. As he looked, sorry about the age thing here, everyone, as he looked about 50 and had a military air, I nicknamed him the Captain of 50 from a phrase I had seen somewhere. My brother did not write the story until after he came to Trieste. I was still in Dublin, and when he sent me the manuscript, as he always used to do when he had completed a story, I suggested my nickname for the fellow as the title for the story, but my brother preferred his own title. But there you are. Like, you
But
know,
there's absolutely no evidence that this man is a pederast.
there's a
Just
hint of it.
because just because Stan uses that word 50 years
Yeah.
later doesn't convince me at all.
Yeah,
There's,
that's fine. That's fine. But it does show that the boys are, Stan knew the term pederast, which I assume is a sign
No.
I
these
know, no,
short
He didn't know
stories.
that he didn't know the term when he was a boy. He's
yeah,
writing
Well,
this. He's writing this much later.
yeah,
And
yeah,
they called him Juggins. They didn't call him a
Juggins.
pederast. They
okay.
called
Yeah,
him a
Okay.
Juggins, which is
and
just
they,
a weird, a loony.
But
there's a hint of now. Of course, you're right, Bill. There's two things here. One is the inspiration, and the other is the author's intent 50 years later or 20 years
Sure.
later.
Yeah.
Sure. But there's a little hint of it there in that word josser, because it sounds very like the word tosser, which is someone who masturbates.
Oh, but I think there's a
So
I think if Joyce wanted to say tosser, he would have said tosser.
yeah, if he wanted to get published, he might not have.
Yeah.
He's very. Anyway, there you go.
Again, I think to my point, to me, Stan is a little thick like Mahoney. I mean,
Mahoney,
and Joyce is very sensitive and precocious and
yeah.
bookish and fanciful and imaginative like our narrator. So, I mean,
Yeah.
Stan's view of things is kind of, I don't know.
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
Tyndall says that according to Webster, slang josser is slang for simpleton,
Yeah.
which hardly seems to apply. But the word can also be pidgin English for a devotee of Joss or a god. Compare Lord Joss, that's from Finnegan's Wake. Probably not God, as some have thought. The pervert may imply what men unable to reach the pigeon house find in place of him. Of him is with a capital.
Well, that's Tyndall's idea that they're in search of the Holy Spirit.
Right. Yes.
That's all nonsense.
well, they are in search of adventure. They're in search of something new. And
Yes. You should get off the fence, Bill, and tell us what you really think.
Okay, I have a dictionary. Let's see if Joss is in it.
In the notes to my edition, Joss is exactly as you described it, John. As a
Yeah, it
simple.
says. Oh, here it says a Chinese god or idol.
Isn't a joss stick incense?
Yes,
Yeah.
joss sticks. That's related to Oriental gods.
Yeah.
Which has absolutely nothing to do with this story or this character.
No, that doesn't make any sense in regard here.
That's one of those.
Like the way that Joyce used the cat to get Mahoney away. So he followed the cat. So the narrator was left with the man himself. I thought that was a lovely little device where Mahoney goes off. Yeah. And the captain of 50 that your man, that Stalin has mentioned there is out of Isaiah 3. He talks about the captain of 50, the counselor, the cunning artificer, the eloquent orator. So Joyce is always kind of relating back somehow to the bits of religion or bits of things he'd written. And he said somewhere too that what he was trying to do was very like what happens at Mass, the transformation of the bread and wine into the body and blood.
Transubstantiation.
Yeah, that he was using ordinary. He was doing this with ordinary happenings. That he's an artist. He was trying to do this. Yeah,
right.
And and the whole story is, of course, the other thing is that they never get to they never get to the end of the journey. So they never reach the pigeon house. So everything in every story in Dubliners, there's something missing. There's something slightly astray, or there's people are at unease for some underlying reason. And the other thing that I liked was the way Joyce, or the narrator, never says his excuse for niching. He names the excuses the other two had, but he never says his own. And there's all this kind of thing that Joyce plays around with, and yeah.
Wasn't his excuse, Tom, to get some adventure outside of school or outside of home?
Yeah, and that succeeded in that. So, what's the thing about green eyes?
Oh,
But
I
that's
don't
a
know.
sailor, isn't it? A green eyes for a sailor, a seaman?
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause
Well, he imagines that Norwegians have green eyes for some reason, probably related to things he's read. And then it turns out that this guy, the old man, has green eyes.
Mhm.
So,
I
you
met
know,
the pair of bottle green eyes peering at me
Yeah.
under a twitching forehead.
Yeah.
Okay, for what it's worth, then I realize appeal to authority is not always legitimate. This is a note from John Weiss Jackson and Bernard McGinley. And their note on the final note is the pervert and the boy have both failed in their quest. Note, however, that the boy's formula is saying goodbye is identical to the man's formula for saying hello. So at least these two gentlemen who wrote the notes for my edition believed that the old man was a pervert. And I won't say that the old man was a pervert at all. I will just say that I think the boy had a legitimate reason to be concerned. And maybe because of his lack of experience. I don't know. But for an old man to be alone with an old man who's talking about getting great pleasure out of whipping boys, I would put that in the perversion category all by itself. Just like I think that Father Dolan in Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, he's a pervert. He gets great pleasure out of whipping boys. And maybe this is Father Dolan after he's been kicked out of the school. I don't know. But those are just my thoughts about it. Always in Joyce, there's room for varying interpretations.
Yeah.
As the character was described at first, he reminds me of Reuben J. He's walking bent over with his hand on his back, the way Reuben with a stick, which is just as the way Reuben J walks all over Dublin.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah. And that's where the ferryman, they've crossed where the ferryman dragged
his son
Reuben Jr. out of the
Reuben
water.
Jr. out of the water, right? So
know,
it's not unlikely. I mean, this is where Reuben J would be. I mean, he haunted around the quays down there. So it's just, and is Reuben J a pervert? No, he's just he's a pawnbroker.
Yeah, Joyce is settling the score over his father's debt.
Yeah. Could be.
One more poke at Reuben J.
But I once sitting in Swedish at a reading, we had a reading of this, and a particular lady who ran the readings, she always locked the doors, closed over the doors. Oh, we're going to read this, and they're a big business. And a discussion emerged about green eyes, and there's a theory that green eyes is a sign of criminals. And
oh my goodness,
a woman sitting beside me turned to me at the end of it and said, "How do you think that makes me feel?" I wasn't saying it. How do you think that makes me feel? And I saw a pair of beautiful green eyes looking at me. So you have to be careful when you sort of say things about people's features.
Yeah, I have a personal reason for asking about the green eyes thing.
Yeah, there we go.
Think,
It's a
God, I
sign
go
of
to
high
Ireland
intelligence, Duncan.
and just has the color of my eyes is going to put me in a suspicious category right away.
Well,
In my notes, it says that possibly an allusion in this context of seafaring and adventure to the medieval tradition that Ulysses, the hero of
Yes.
Homer's Odyssey, had green eyes.
Metempsychosis, Duncan. You're on the next lap of Ulysses. That's why you're interested in the book.
when the boy is first talking about green eyes and Norwegian sailors, it's with a very romantic notion of these sailors as being somehow majestic and things to look up to. And then when he's confronted with these eyes of this old man, he noted them, but he doesn't really react to them in the same way.
Did Ulysses have green eyes?
Who
According
knows?
to these notes,
It was Odysseus that had green eyes, but that's the same guy.
Odysseus.
Yeah.
Yes, he was said to have green eyes, my notes say.
Yes.
Yeah.
But again, whether that has any bearing on what we're reading here or not is,
Anybody's guess.
yeah, it's debatable, I suppose.
Very, very minor sign. I mean, the idea of going on an adventure is to find things that you didn't expect.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's really the whole deal. I mean, if you go on an adventure and everything is as it's just normal stuff, you can't call it an adventure. But, I mean, look here, we can assume that the boy who was talking mainly with the old man, when he's at school the next day, he's going to tell him about this weird old man. And that's going to be his adventure story right off the bat. And then, of course, later on in life, he takes it and he makes it into a written story. So, and the green eyes is one. They see the boat and he's looking to see what color eyes the sailor has because he's expecting to see a green-eyed sailor, but he doesn't. But then he's sitting on the hill, and he and the old man are talking, and he turns and he looks at the old man's eyes, and I'm going to add some words of my own. To his shock, the old man has green eyes. So that's a sort of tissue that makes adventures where you discover that things are not how you think they are. Sailors don't have green eyes, but somehow this old man does have green eyes. So probably, and so you add that to the story too.
Yeah.
Can we discuss the final sentence?
Yeah.
When I first read it, I laughed because I thought, how true, how true. And then I thought, no, that's really sort of sad. That this is a kid you're hanging out with.
Yeah.
And you assume they're friends. And my first reaction was the kid says, but I never really liked it. And I thought, it was funny. And then the more I thought about it, I said, that's very sad. He's hanging out with this kid he doesn't like. And I do wonder why. I wonder why, and I wonder why it hits him then, because the kid Manny is doing something nice. He's coming to help him. He thinks when he calls him for the second time, and then the narrator says, he was being a good friend, and I never really liked him.
Yeah.
We didn't make
I think Joyce may have despised Stan a little.
Yeah.
For
But
being for being so thick and not, and so it rings true to me that
But he does say I
he
was
has that line in he has that line in Ulysses, a brother is easily as easily as forgotten.
Not an
Right.
umbrella.
Yeah.
An umbrella.
Yeah.
But he is penitent because he was like
Is
that.
it?
So there's
Yeah.
he's changed, you see. And I was penitent, for in my heart I'd always. So he's repented of.
But I think it's very funny the way they call themselves Smith and Murphy, and the way he shouts Murphy, Murphy.
Yeah.
So there's no wonder it took long to answer.
Yeah, there's one of the little.
It took him 2 tries to remember. Oh yeah, I'm
Joyce.
Murphy.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. The guy's he's not the brightest bulb.
No.
And
It's hard to get used to a assumed name.
well, I think the whole notion that he ran as if to bring me aid, that's in the kid's head. That's not, he just ran. I mean, Mahoney doesn't have a brain in his head, I don't think. So he's not worried, and he's not bringing him aid. It's just the kid who's creating this anxiety over this old man who is just an old man who he goes round and round in his story. So he's not, I don't think it's as if he's really capable of planning anything or plot. He's just wandering in his thoughts and in his speech, keeps repeating the same things over and over again, first about the girls, then about whipping the boys. I don't see that as being particularly perverse or dangerous or scary, but the kid does, who is, again, if he's Joyce, or as he is in this story, he's more sensitive than Mahoney. He's more sensitive than his friend. And we get senses of that throughout the story, just the way he reacts to the way the other boys behave and things. He's a bit apart from them in his sensitivity and in his experience of things. And he makes up stories, just the way Joyce did.
Yeah, I should add, I do not think the old man is dangerous. But I think the old man is definitely odd and perverse.
Repeat.
I think that's an honest and a reasonable way to look at the story. I don't. I think he's just an old man.
And to Lois's point, Lois, I would look at actually the last part of the last sentence, where for in my heart I had always despised him a little. And I think that the qualification of a little is important because, of course, what Joyce is working on, in my opinion, is he's working on his ability to describe things in all of their nuance. And that it doesn't mean that he despised him a lot.
No, I don't think he hates the kid, but there's something about him like, I had another phrase in mind, it just went out of my head. But he sort of dismissed him. He sort of didn't think he was important. There was something about him that didn't seem to matter. That's how I saw it, that he didn't matter.
But look at this, look at right above that. It says, how my heart beat as he came running across the field to me. He ran as if to bring me aid. So there within this despising of a little is also a great appreciation that his friend is coming.
Yes, but that's
Yeah.
now, today, this moment. My God, he's coming to help me. I always thought he was a jerk.
Yeah.
That's how
he's
I
not
read
saying
it.
that.
Yeah.
He's saying he thinks he was a little jerk.
Yeah.
There's an interesting note in my edition, which is the same as yours, Louis. And it says Gifford cites 2 Samuel, 6:21, 6:16, and 6:23.
Uh-huh.
In this biblical incident, Saul's daughter is punished by God with childlessness because of her unrepentantly scornful attitude to King David. I don't know what that has to do with anything.
I have no idea. Yeah, I ignored
Bill, I
that.
think, has a word for it, you know?
Yes, I do.
I think it's
Bollocks,
double,
bollocks,
double
bollocks.
Well, actually, once again, I'll take a contrary stand. This is the note that my book has, and it's actually, I think, worth thinking about. So it's talked about the last sentence. The second half of the sentence is possibly a recollection of second chapter of Samuel something something 16, where Michael sees David and she despises him in her heart for leaping and dancing before the Lord. You
What does
know,
what
don't
does that
take it
have to
too
do with
seriously.
anything? So, I mean, it's like putting the word despise in a search engine and finding any other reference to that. It has nothing to do with this story.
Absolutely right. But McLuhan says the action is in the gap of the wheel, that wheels work by the axle having a little space in there. And so having things like this just to think about. Because of course we all get stuck in our opinions and our views. We're just like the boy. We see the world the way that we've taught ourselves to see it. And where the real life is when we discover things that don't fit with our current interpretation of whatever we're experiencing. That's really where the action is. Otherwise, it's just repetition of the same old stuff that we've already, that may have been exciting and of interest, before, but, it gets too stuck. So that's all I'm saying. Okay. A
There
decision.
used to be, in my neighborhood, there used to be this sort of a cliff face, which was not much of anything. It was just this little patch of earth where the hill went up and there was a parking lot above it and a little road going up to it. It may have been 15 feet from the sidewalk to the top,
Mhm.
covered with trees and a path going on. And when I was 10 and 11 and stuff, or maybe younger too, but my friends and I would make the most absolute uh, fanciful adventure stories of what we were doing. We were Tarzan, we were pirates, we were,
Mhm.
you can create that kind of adventure out of this place with cars going by up the street. We're on this little hill. I mean, it was probably hardly ever, if we had fallen, we might have scratched our knees or something. It was not any big danger, but we concocted the notion that it was a dangerous adventure. And I think there's some element of that here, that
Mhm. Mhm.
this is a kid who craves adventure and turns anything. He would turn anything. If they had run into an ice cream man, he'd make some kind of story out of it. Or
Mhm.
anyway,
Yeah, no, no, no. I'm eternally grateful that when I was a child, I could leave the house and I could go off and very soon be involved in all kinds of adventures.
yeah.
Some which were admittedly a little bit dangerous. Most of them weren't
Yeah.
dangerous at all. And most of the adventures were, things that I would make up and my friends and I would make up in our heads.
Yeah.
And I'm, compared to my understanding of children these days, I had marvelous freedom to do all that stuff.
That's for
We
sure.
had great freedom,
Yeah.
yeah, to wander. And
Yep.
Yep.
my mother used to say, she said, I never knew if you were going to come home at night. And I thought, well, that's reassuring. That's comforting.
Yeah.
But that was the way it was. You'd leave in the morning, and who knew where you'd end up?
Mhm.
Uh, and
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've lived right by the ocean, so of course there was all kinds of possibilities of me falling off the cliff into the ocean itself.
mm, mm.
Yeah.
But it was great, great material to live in a fantasy world.
Yeah.
Okay, other points before we either conclude or we move on to a different story?
And if Joyce wanted us to be thinking about it, it worked. Obviously, something happened. He embellished it. Otherwise, it wouldn't be interesting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, he's master at leaving a nice gap between the axle and the center part of a wheel.
And I guess, I suppose, we're looking at it through the eyes of people living in a completely different century. Now, obviously, there was people we used to call when we were growing up, but you just stayed away from them. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Now we know so much more. We're kind of small bit blinded by that. If we allow ourselves to be, unlike Bill. I'm with you.
I think, I mean, there's well, the beauty of Joyce's writing is that he intentionally ambiguous. So it makes for various interpretations and understandings, and it deepens. I mean, it makes the story richer in that way. You can look at it so many different ways.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm not saying that my way is the correct way. I just saying I don't buy the pedophile thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's also clear that he doesn't give us all the facts, and this is part of his style, you know, and that's what provides for so much discussion after reading.
Yeah.
I think it's more than just his style, though. I think it's he's an underlying theme, at least when I read almost anything by Joyce, is trying to say the world is infinite, even your everyday world. The amount of ways to look at it are infinite, and you'll never really know the truth of it because our brains are just not constructed in that way, and the world is so much vaster and more interesting. So, and to me, that's an example.
And if you think about it, most of the things we do on very incomplete knowledge.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah, I totally agree. I think
simplest thing.
Humility, a certain degree of humility is almost requisite.
One thing, I mean, just that example of Mahoney saying, "Look what that old Josser's doing. It's off stage. We don't know, and it allows some people to say, oh, he must have been masturbating, or he allows me to say, oh, he's taking a leak. Maybe he's chewing on a dandelion, or maybe he's picking petals off the way girls, as this described, choose their sweethearts. Maybe he's eating a bun. Maybe he's picking his nose. We don't know. We have no idea what he's doing.
Maybe he's taken a flask out of his coat and taken a little nip.
Right. Yeah. Could be.
Yeah. What do you call those blot tests that psychologists use?
Rorschach.
And you know, someone sees a butterfly, and someone else sees, a heart being ripped out of a victim. You know, and this way, what Bill said there is it's so much of it. Joyce, that people just flare up. It tells you more. It holds the mirror up to the reader rather than anything else, because you see yourself.
Yep. Let's see. It is 2:07. Do we want to stop at this point, or do we want to begin reading Araby?
Araby is very short, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is it?
It's
only got 6 pages. Only got 6 pages.
It's short, yeah.
Well, actually, both of these other stories are short too.
They're all short.
2, 3.
Yeah, I think maybe next week, Araby and Evelyn could be done in one sitting.
Okay, perhaps 6 pages as opposed to 8 pages.
Yeah.
Those 2 stories. All right, well, let's do that. Let's see.
They're both. Evelyn is really short.
But it's pretty rich. It's got a lot to talk about, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is
So-
the one that frustrated me. Oh, yeah.
I don't mind if you're free before that. Always.
Mhm.
Okay.
So
well,
are we?
How are you fixed?
That's done.
but I gotta, yeah, let me do the,
Yeah.
use my executive powers here.
Magic powers.
Sorry, I respond so slowly sometimes.
Dictator for one day.
Mm.
Okay. Well, I've had fun. I hope you all have.
That was
Absolutely.
Good, very
That's
good
great.
discussion.
Okay. If we are going to try 2 stories next time, though they be a
Mhm.
bit shorter, it would be a long session, particularly if we want to do any justice to the discussion afterwards. For myself, I got time, but if
Yeah.
anybody feels pressured for time, let me know. We'll adjust accordingly.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Duncan.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you.